Hi everyone, this is Mostly Casual Commander, where we do our best to keep Commander fun without sacrificing your ability to win. I'm BK, and today I have a game of Commander for you. Our commanders for this game are Lord Windgrace, partners Bruse and Falthis, Edgar Markov, and Lathril, Blade of the Elves. First up is Busterkins, who won the die roll. He's piloting Lord Windgrace, a Jund Planeswalker commander that cares about lands. He kept a 7-card hand with Forge of Heroes, Swamp, Mountain, Multani, Yavimaya Zevatar, Realms Uncharted, Terminate, and a Farseek. Number 2 in the turn order is J-Man. He has partner commanders Bruse, Tarl, Boorish Herder, as well as Falthis, Shadowcat Familiar. This is a Voltron-style deck that is trying to have a whole bunch of equipment and a whole bunch of keywords that are given to his creatures, making them super scary. He has Godless Shrine, Fetid Heath, Anger, Akroma's Will, Stoneforge Mystic, Kelith, Sunmane Familiar, and a Mox Amber. Third in the turn order is myself, BK. I'm piloting Edgar Markov, a vampire tribal deck that's trying to make super big scary vampires. I kept a 7-card hand with Sunbait Canyon, Luxury Suite, Bright Climb Pathway, which could be Grim Climb Pathway, Sanctum Seeker, Collective Effort, Sorin, Imperious Bloodlord, and Orzhov's Signet. Last but not least, we have Kyle, who's 4th in the turn order. He's using Lathril, Blade of the Elves, for his commander. It's a Golgari Elves tribal deck that's looking to aggro out your opponents, as well as make good use of Lathril's activated ability. He kept a 7-card hand with Swamp, Forest, Sylvan Messenger, Pact of the Serpent, Elvish Warmaster, Joraga Warcaller, and Llanowar Elves. Our seats are chosen at random with Busterkins top left, J-Man top right, BK bottom right, and Kyle bottom left. Before we begin, it'd mean an awful lot to us if you could subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and like the content that you've been enjoying. So we have $10 of store credit to Millennium Games in Rochester, New York that we're playing for in this game. Busterkins will kick us off by playing a mountain and passing it over to J-Man. He drops Godless Shrine tapped and moves it over to BK. I play a Luxury Suite for my land, and I say go. Kyle shortcuts a forest and follows it up with Llanowar Elves, passing it over to Busterkins. On to turn 2, he draws and drops Swamp as his land for turn. J-Man plays Fetid Heath as his land for turn, filtering some Orzhov-colored mana, and plays Kelith, Sunmane Familiar, a horse that pumps up your commanders by giving it counters. Sunbait Canyon hits the battlefield on my side of the board. Following that, an Orzhov's Signet enters the battlefield, and I take 1 damage from Sunbait Canyon. On Kyle's turn, he puts down a Swamp, and he casts Elvish Warmaster, an elf that can make him more elves. It also has an overrun adjacent effect. He then sends a message to BK with his Llanowar Elves chipping in for 1 point. Forge of Heroes enters the battlefield on Busterkins' board, and he has to say go. Graven Cairns enters the battlefield on J-Man's side, and he casts Skyclave Relic, allowing him to have 1 mana of any color be produced by that artifact. Then Mox Amber hits the battlefield for him as well. It's pretty decent ramping effects in Mardu colors. Stoneforge Mystic hits the battlefield and triggers its ability to find an equipment card for J-Man. He finds Sword of Feast and Famine and puts it into his hand. And with that, he passes the turn over to BK, plays a Swamp as land for turn, and casts Gifted Aetherborn. This triggers Edgar Markov, allowing a 1/1 vampire to hit the battlefield. And with that, I ship the turn over to Kyle. He draws, kicks a Joraga Warcaller. When it ETBs, it procs Elvish Warmaster, making another 1/1 Elf Warrior token, and pumps the team given the amount of counters on the Joraga Warcaller. He moves to combat, swinging at J-Man, dealing 3 points of damage. On to turn 4, Busterkins terminates the Joraga Warcaller, not wanting to allow Kyle to get out of hand too quickly. He places a Gruul Turf onto the battlefield and bounces a mountain back to his hand. Sword of Feast and Famine hits the battlefield for J-Man, and he then equips it to Kelith, Sunmane Familiar. And with that, he moves to combat at BK, moving right past my 2 black creatures with Sword of Feast and Famine. This makes me discard Collective Effort and untaps J-Man's lands. And then with those fresh lands, he casts Falthis, Shadowcat Familiar, one of his commanders. After that, he says go. BK drops Bright Climb Pathway as a land for turn, and then casts Sanctum Seeker. This triggers Edgar Markov, allowing a 1/1 vampire to hit the field. And then I move to combat, swinging Gifted Aetherborn and a vampire token at Busterkins. This triggers Sanctum Seeker, draining my opponent's 2, and I gain 2. And with no other effects, combat damage resolves, taking Busterkins down to 35, and I gain 2 more life off of Gifted Aetherborn's lifelink. Gnarlroot Trapper hits the battlefield on Kyle's board. This triggers his Elvish Warmaster, giving him another Elf Warrior token, and he decides to hold up blockers. Mountain hits the battlefield for Busterkins, followed by Crash of Rhino Beetles, 5/5 Trampler that can become a 15/15 later on. He passes to J-Man, who equips Falthis with Sword of Feast and Famine. Then he casts Commander's Plate, a really great equipment that looks to equip your commander and protect them from a bunch of things. Trailblazer's Boots is the next spell that can be equipped to give non-basic land walk to a creature. He then again swings at BK, triggering Kelith, putting a +1/+1 counter on Falthis. He makes me discard with Sword of Feast and Famine, and it also untaps his lands. He then puts Commander Plate onto his commander. Temple of the False Gods is BK's land for turn, then follows that up with Cordial Vampire, triggering Edgar Markov, putting another 1/1 vampire token onto the battlefield. Sorin, Imperious Bloodlord, hits the battlefield on BK's side of the board, and then with that I activate the +1 ability to give +1/+1, Death Touch, and Lifelink to my Sanctum Seeker. Then I move to combat, swinging 4 creatures, 2 at Busterkins, 2 at J-Man. This triggers Sanctum Seeker 4 times, draining my opponent's 4 and giving me 4 life. Busterkins blocks a token, I gain some life from Lifelink, and Cordial Vampire triggers. Onto Kyle's turn, he uses his Monodorks to ping himself 1 life, and cast Lathril, Blade of the Elves. When this ETBs, it triggers Elfish Warmaster, giving him another 1/1 Elf Warrior token. He passes it over to Busterkins, who plays Realms Uncharted. So he'll find 4 different land cards, allow Kyle to select 2 of them to go to his hand, and 2 to go to the graveyard. In this case, Kyle chooses Fabled Passage and Bajuka Bog to go to the bin, and the Swamp and Forest go to his hand. He played the Swamp before J-Man plays Bruse, Tarl, Boorish Herder, his second commander. This triggers, giving double strike and lifelink to Falthis. He then moves to combat, triggering Kelith. He deals 18 more commander damage, which is lethal. This knocks BK out of the game. Super sad that my black vampires could not defend against the Sword of Feast and Famine on his commander. So this still allows him to untap his lands, which he then uses to cast Thran Dynamo, a 4-drop mono rock that allows him to tap for 3 colorless mana. Kyle plays Forest as his land for turn, and moves to combat with Lathril at Busterkins. And once it dealt combat damage, he gets 2 more elf tokens. In second main phase, he casts Sylvan Messenger, triggering Warmaster, and allowing him to reveal the top 4 cards of his library, putting any elf revealed this way into his hand. He finds Forest, Fauna Shaman, Crippling Fear, and Court of Calling. He puts Fauna Shaman into his hand. The rest on the bottom of his library. On Busterkin's turn, he plays Forest as his land. Then he moves to combat, swinging his 5/5 Trampler at J-Man. He takes it and casts Damnation. He follows up his board wipe with Farseek, allowing him to tutor up a plains, island, swamp, or mountain, and put it onto the battlefield tapped. In this case, it's a mountain. On the J-Man's turn, he plays Savai Triome, a Mardu-colored tri-land, and casts Falthis, Shadowcat Familiar again. He then equips Sword of Feast and Famine to Falthis and passes to Kyle, who plays Swamp as his land for turn, and Fauna Shaman, allowing him to tutor up different creature cards by activating its ability. On to Busterkin's turn, he plays Akuum Refuge, which gives him 1 life. He then follows that up by playing 6-drop Ancient Green Warden, a 5/7 Reacher that can allow him to play lands from his graveyard and is basically land Harmonicon. He passes to J-Man, who plays Armored Sky Hunter, a creature that allows him to look at the top cards of his library and put in a free aura or equipment. He equips Commander's Plate to his Falthis and attacks Kyle. This deals 7 points of commander damage, making him discard a card and untapping his lands before he passes over to Kyle. On Kyle's turn, he plays Numa, Joraga Chieftain. Kyle can use this elf to sink some mana into it, and pumping the team on combat. On to Busterkin's turn, he casts his commander, Lord Windgrace. His planeswalker can rummage, and draw an additional card if it's a land that you discard. It can return lands from the graveyard to the battlefield, and if you're lucky enough to ultimate it, it could blow up a bunch of things and make a bunch of cats. He activates his +2 ability, discarding a land, drawing 2 cards. He then activates Forge of Heroes, giving Lord Windgrace an additional loyalty counter. Following that, he passes it over to J-Man. He draws for turn, and he casts Swords to Plowshares on Ancient Green Warden. This gives Busterkins 5 life, but remove that threat from the table. Anger hits the battlefield on J-Man's side of the board. Of course, that creature loves to be in a graveyard, but here, J-Man's trying to close out the game. On the attack, he triggers Sky Hunter, looks at the top 6 cards of his library, and may drop an equipment or aura. Unfortunately, he whiffs, and all of those cards go to the bottom of his library. Nevertheless, he deals combat damage to his opponents. This triggers Sword of Feast and Famine. Kyle discards a Crater of Behemoth. J-Man passes, and on his end step, Kyle activates Fauna Shaman. He discards a creature card, a Shaman of the Pack, and he tutors up a Reclamation Sage from his library and puts it into his hand. He then moves to his turn. He draws. He gets really greedy by casting Sign in Blood for 2 mana, taking 2 life, drawing 2 cards, hoping for a land, and it's not. So he gets super sad, can't cast his Reclamation Sage, passes it to Busterkins, who activates Lord Windgrace's +2, rummaging, a land, and drawing 2. He then casts Multani, Yavimai's avatar, who is a 12/12. However, Busterkin swiftly makes him a 13/13 by dropping Kazandu Refuge, also gaining 1 point of life. Over to J-Man, he plays a mountain for turn. He then casts Ruinous Ultimatum. So J-Man clears Busterkin's and Kyle's boards. He then moves to combat, swinging everything at his opponents. This triggers Armored Skyhunter. He looks at the top 6 cards of his library, and he finds an equipment. In this case, it's Black Blade Reforged. He can cast this for free and equip it for free because of Skyhunter's ability. He equips Skyhunter, giving it +5/+5. He knocks out Kyle with Falthis' power, given that it's lethal commander damage. He drops Busterkins down to 20. Post-combat, he is allowed to cast Bruse Tarl because he untapped his lands. And then on to Busterkin's turn. He draws, he casts his commander again, Lord Windgrace. I think Busterkin sees that the writing is on the walls in this case, so he's going to go ahead and rummage in an effort to find something that can deal with J-Man's board state. He activates Windgrace's +2, discards a land, draws 2 cards. He finds a Maelstrom Pulse, and he casts it, targeting Bruse Tarl in an effort to reduce some of the damage that J-Man is capable of dealing at this point. J-Man, on his turn, finds a Temple of the False Gods. This makes Skyhunter a little bit more thick swole. He then casts a Chroma's Will, giving his creatures all of the keyword texts: Flying, Vigilance, Double Strike, Lifelink, etc. So he moves to combat. He erroneously taps his creatures, but that's okay. He then triggers Skyhunter, revealing Pen and Blade off the top. This casts for free and equips to his commander for free, giving it an additional +3/+3. This is more than enough to knock out Busterkins, which makes J-Man the winner. Congratulations, J-Man, on your victory. You also win $10 of store credit at Millennium Games. So please let us know what you think. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. And as always, thank you so much for watching. We'll see y'all next time.